Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Here to welcome you into episode number 147, son. Today, we're going to be taking a quick look at an album by a band that up until about a month or so ago, I had never heard of. The album in question is called Bored Animal. And the band, London-based art pop-punksters, His Lordship. Now, as I mentioned just a second ago, this is a band that up until very recently I had never heard of, had no idea that they even existed. That is, until it was announced that this band was going to be playing a show here in Nashville, opening up for the greatest guitar player of all time, the living legend, the immortal Mr. Johnny Marr. Now, I do realize, when I voice the opinion that I think that Johnny Marr is the greatest guitar player of all time, I realize that I am coming from a place of bias because, yes, the Smiths are my favorite band, and I do believe that Morrissey is the greatest singer and songwriter in the history of rock and roll, and yes, as an extension of that, I do believe that Johnny Marr is, if not the most elite guitar player in the world, certainly one of the most elite, so I can assure you that whenever it's announced that Johnny Marr is coming to town, wherever it is I may be living at the time, you can bet your sweet Aunt Fanny that you'll see my fat ass in the crowd, son. I saw Johnny Marr last September at the Warfield in San Francisco, a show that he played with the band James, another band that I am a relatively big fan of. That show was absolutely incredible. So, of course, when it was announced that he was going to be coming to Nashville this September, I was very much excited, and one of the first things I did was I went out and I began researching the band that was announced as his opener. This band, His Lordship, which I've already mentioned a couple times, I had never heard of up until that point in time. So what I did was I immediately skedaddled it over to the band's Spotify page, and I began digging through their catalog, specifically listening to their most current record, Bored Animal, which I do believe, if you can trust the credits on Spotify, I do believe that this record came out in June of this year, and I can tell you, I feel pretty safe in saying that this is one of my favorite records of 2025. In fact, I would go as far as to suggest that unless between now and the end of the year we are just hit with a monsoon of incredible music, this record will in fact be one of my favorite records of 2025. It is absolutely incredible. It is loud, it's noisy, it's bratty, it's snotty, it's clanky. It is an album that definitely flies the flag, if you understand what I mean, something that I am totally appreciative of. You know, if I were to sort of describe this band, I mentioned a second ago that I sort of described them as sort of art pop punk, which I think is a sort of fitting description. But if I were to break it down into simpler terms, in terms that even a dullard like myself can understand, I would say that this band is sort of a cross between the Jam and the White Stripes. Now, the White Stripes to me are a band that I could sort of take or leave most of the time. If I'm in the mood for them, they're a band that I don't mind listening to, but not a band that I worship at the altar of. Now, having said that, you know, it's sort of a dangerous thing to say living here in Nashville, because, of course, Jack White now lives down here in Nashville, and he is considered to be one of the kings of rock and roll, which I appreciate. Not here to disagree with that. I'm just saying that they aren't necessarily my luggage, but to me, the Jam are the greatest punk rock band of all time, and if you are going to compare any band to the Jam, it should be done deliberately, and it should be done with the highest of praise, and that is the praise that I sort of bestow upon this band, His Lordship. This is a record that I've been listening to very heavily over the past month or so, a record that I have not been able to sort of, get enough of. As I mentioned before, this record is visceral, it's intense, it's quick, it's fast, it's 11 songs. This record comes in, it punches you in the teeth, it kicks you in the nuts, and it's out the door in 28 minutes. And if you're me, every time this record ends, it leaves you with the urge to go back to the very beginning and go through the whole process again. Like I said before, this is a record I've been listening to in extremely heavy rotation since I discovered them about a month and a half ago. This record is just chocked full of awesome tracks. This album is 100% energy all the time. These songs are about 2 minutes. They come in, they perform all sorts of shenanigans, and then they get out the door. The first song on this record is the title track. It is called Bored Animal. According to the band, at least at the show we saw in Nashville, this song is sort of about media fatigue, something that I can definitely relate to, something that I can definitely tell you I experience every day living in the crazy world that we live in now. Whether it is traditional media or social media, I am mediated out. I realize sitting here on this channel, I'm a hypocrite for saying that, but at the end of the day, my shit don't stink, son, and it never has. I would say that over the past month or so, my media fatigue has definitely been stretched to the breaking point, especially in terms of politics and especially in terms of, you know, the Trump administration and his followers and the maggots and especially the little Nazi guy that got taken out in Utah about a month or so ago, and the whole state funeral that the media has given that guy because they are deathly afraid of Trump and his followers. It is absolutely disgusting. I love the song Bored Animal. It comes in and it just starts off the record with a blistering pace. Basically, this entire record has, it knows one speed. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen on this record. It goes in a lot of different directions. There are different sort of, emotions conveyed, if you will. But really, this album is just pedal to the metal, balls to the wall, in your face. I love the song. It's a great way to kick off the record. A few other songs on the record to me that are very, high points on the record is the second song, which is called Marc-Andre Leclerc. This is somebody that I had no idea who this was when I first went through and read the track listing of this record, just based on the name, Marc-Andre Leclerc. I was able to sort of ascertain in my own head that he was Canadian. In fact, I remember thinking to myself, I bet this guy was probably like a goalie for the Montreal Canadiens back in the 1960s, just based on that name. Well, I wasn't too far off. Turns out that Marc-Andre Leclerc was a famous mountain climber, Canadian famous mountain climber, who passed away in 2018, something that I didn't know, somebody that I'd never heard of. Who says that punk rock can't teach you anything? Thank you, His Lordship. Not that I am necessarily a huge fan of mountain climbing. I'd never climbed a mountain in my life, but learned something from the band. Another song I really like on this album is the third song, Old Romantic. That song is awesome. I really like the song Derek E. Fudge. The last song on side one is a song called Downer Town, which I really like a lot now. There really isn't anything on this record that I don't like. In fact, I would say that this record doesn't really have any skippage. Every time I listen to this record, I go through the entire thing, start to finish. Now, having said that, if I had to pick one weakest song, which I always hate saying that. I always hate picking out the weakest album in a band's catalog or the weakest song on an album. But to me, the second side starts off with a song that is probably the weakest song on this album. I still like it. That's a song called 12-12-21. Don't necessarily love it. To me, it's kind of an anonymous track. It's not bad. There really isn't anything bad on this record. But to me, that's the one song that I could sort of take or leave at the end of the day. I don't skip it because these songs on this record are so quick, so fast that by the time you reach out to skip, the song's pretty much over anyway, so you may as well just take the ride. The second song on side two is a song I absolutely love. They sort of described this song at the show here in Nashville. The song was called Weirdo in the Park, a song that I think they said they wrote during COVID because this band is based out of London, and he made the joke. He said, well, there's always been weirdos in the park, but it seems like during and since COVID, it has become much more of an epidemic. As he was telling that story, I remember thinking to myself, are you sure you guys aren't from San Francisco? Because that sounds exactly like life out in San Francisco. I love that song. The next song after that is a song called The Sadness of King Kong, which I absolutely love as well. The last song on this record is a song called Gin and Fog, a very beautiful instrumental track. At the show in Nashville, he dedicated this song to former Pogues frontman Shane MacGowan. Apparently, he and Shane MacGowan were pretty close friends. Shane MacGowan, of course, is somebody that everybody that is into this style of music misses every single day. That is, unless you are one of the surviving members of the Pogues who are out there touring without him. I mean, how is this possible? Are people really this dumb? Are music fans really rubes on this level that you can go out and you can see the Pogues without Shane MacGowan? I was just talking about this same thing with one of my friends the other day. He and I are both relatively big Cars fans. Now, I was somebody, I never got a chance to see the Cars. He never got a chance to see the Cars. The two principal members of the Cars have gone tits up. But in today's musical climate, that does not necessarily mean that the Cars can't tour. And people would be dumb enough to go. I can guarantee you. People, oh my God, man, the Cars, holy crap, I can't believe I'm going to get to see the American new wave icons, man, holy crap. People are going out there and seeing the Pogues without Shane MacGowan. Now, if you're dumb enough to buy a ticket, I don't really have any sympathy for you. I was fortunate in the sense that I got a chance to see Shane MacGowan twice. Once solo in San Francisco with his band, the Popes, and then in the, whenever it was in the late 2000s, early 2000 teens, when the Pogues reformed. I was living up in Seattle. I got a chance to see the Pogues with Shane MacGowan in Seattle, and both of those experiences to me were life-altering. To me, the Pogues are easily one of my top 10, if not top 15 favorite bands of all time. I love them with all of my heart and soul. But that you can't have it without Shane MacGowan. The fact that the band is out there touring without him makes me honestly want to honk. I mean, at the end of the day, though, you have to blame the fans. You can't blame the band, because if the fans weren't going, the bands wouldn't be there. It's the same exact thing with Marky Ramone. I've mentioned this before. If you never got a chance to see the Ramones, I'm sorry. Maybe you're too young. Maybe that's the downside to youth. I was somebody, I got a chance to see the Ramones live one time at the very end back in 1996. And Dee Dee wasn't even there. It was Johnny, Joey, and Marky, and CJ. Now, you know, at the end of the day, I was 21 years old. I was just really starting to get into this style of music. And I was standing there looking at Joey Ramone. I was relatively close. Johnny Ramone, even Marky Ramone, somebody I don't really have anything against, apart from the fact that he tours with his cover band, doing Ramones songs, a band that he was not even an original member of. Now, yes, all right, yes, Marky Ramone was in the Ramones forever. I'll never take that away from him. But the fact that people are going to see him do a Ramones show with a bunch of nerds who are in a cover band, I'll never understand it. How are the Pogues touring without Shane MacGowan? You need to start holding these bands accountable. You can vote with your dollars. I think that's the only way that our vote even matters, at least in this country, anymore. Now, I love the Pogues. Don't get me wrong. I said before, they're one of my top 5, 10, 15 favorite bands of all time. But I would never in a million years even, even entertain the idea of going to see them without Shane MacGowan. It would never happen in a million years. And yet they're playing in the United States. And in fact, I think they just played Riot Fest in Chicago. I don't understand it. Anyway, the song, Gin and Fog, is incredible. Love that song. But my favorite song off this record is the next to last song. Actually, when I began listening to this record, it was the first song I listened to because I was intrigued by the title. When I went on the band's Spotify page, that is the song I Fly Planes into Hurricanes. To me, that song is perfect. That's a perfect pop, punk, art pop song. It's like 2 minutes, it's visceral, it's in your face, and to me, it really sort of sets the tone. I mean, it's not the first song on the record, but really it's sort of, if that's the first song you listen to by this band, that was the first song I listened to by this band, I think you will be hooked, because I love that song. That was the very first song. What I was going to say was that was the very first song they played at the show at the Brooklyn Bowl in Nashville, and being my favorite song of theirs, I was very excited about that, but it just set the tone for their entire performance, which was awesome, by the way. Now, as far as the show itself goes, the show was held at the Brooklyn Bowl here in Nashville, a place that I like, a place that some locals will sort of take a dump on, but it's a place that I've always really liked. It's a place that I've seen a lot of great shows. I've also seen the Dresden Dolls there. A band and an artist, that being Amanda Palmer, that I am not a big fan of, never have been, cannot give her my endorsement. Not that she's out there looking for my endorsement. I realize that she'll probably sleep just fine tonight, knowing that some toad out there in Nashville is not necessarily her biggest fan. Now, that show was basically what I expected it would be. I mean, the place was absolutely packed. The Amanda Palmer sort of / Dresden Doll fan base is interesting. It's made up, generally speaking, I would say 75% of the fans, at least at the show here in Nashville, were the sort of, genderless blob shims. And I think that that's sort of the type of artist that she generally, or the type of fan, I should say, that she sort of typically attracts. Now, despite the fact that I'm not a fan of the Dresden Dolls or Amanda Palmer, she is an artist that up until a certain point in time, I had a pretty benign relationship with. She's somebody that I didn't really like, didn't really understand her music, but at the end of the day, she didn't really bother me. Now, I don't mind telling her fans that I'm not a big fan of hers, regardless of how defensive or aggro they get when you hear that, because her fans are people that sort of, overly worship her. Now, I say that as somebody as a Morrissey fan, and yes, I am the Morrissey fan that overly worships Steve, and I realize that most Morrissey fans sort of fall into that category. Now, Amanda Palmer is not on the same level in terms of general popularity that somebody like Steve is, but her fans are no less devout, and her fans, if you criticize her or the Dresden Dolls, they do have a tendency to get a little bit defensive, a little bit aggro, but at the end of the day, I feel completely safe in criticizing her to her fans, because these are people that are just in remarkably bad shape. I mean, if somebody that is a Amanda Palmer or Dresden Dolls fan decides to get up in your grill because you weren't necessarily a fan of hers, all you have to do to escape them is scale about a half flight of steps, which basically renders them useless. You understand what I'm saying? But there was a point in time, for many years, that my sort of lack of opinion of Amanda Palmer and the Dresden Dolls was pretty benign. She didn't bother me. I thought that she was very self-important. I thought that her ego was overly bloated for what her skill set is. But where I sort of turned on her was during COVID. Because like all other self-important buzzards, Amanda Palmer took it upon herself during COVID to tell other people how they should conduct themselves, how they should live their lives, all the while being tucked away in New Zealand with the millions of dollars that were given to her by her husband. I lost all respect, whatever respect I had for her, which was not much, to be fair. But I lost all respect for her when it came to her stances during COVID. It must be easy, it must be really nice to be tucked away in New Zealand counting the money that your husband gave you while other people were struggling to survive. This is why people do not take musicians and celebrities seriously when it comes to their political opinions. Now, as far as the Dresden Dolls show, it was about what I expected. I didn't really know that music could be that objectionable. Well, there's a couple of other examples I've experienced that were actually worse. I would say the Dresden Dolls was probably in my top 5 least favorite shows I've ever seen. Now, I've said this before. The worst show I ever saw in my entire life was Motley Crue. I'm sorry, I apologize. If you're a fan of Motley Crue, that's great. I'm not here to criticize you. I'm not here to disagree with you. I've never really been a huge fan of Motley Crue. That isn't my luggage. But I had a girlfriend for many years, and she was a huge fan of, 80s hair metal and glam rock, and Motley Crue was her favorite band of all time, and her and I went to go see them live, and I honestly did not know that a show could be that terrible. In fact, I remember, as I was watching the show, her and I got separated because she wanted to be very up close, and I didn't necessarily want to be, so I sort of stood in the back, she went up to the very front, and I remember as we were watching the Motley Crue show, I remember sort of feeling bad for her, because it was so bad. I remember, even though this was her favorite band, and she was completely biased, I mean, she thought that they were the jug, son! I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, this is terrible. I feel terrible. She's going to be distraught. I'm going to have to put my arms around her. I'm going to have to console her. I'm going to tell her it's okay. Everybody gets older. I never saw this band in their prime, but I mean, this is not good. As the show ended, though, and I began working my way up to the front to find her, I was shocked to find that she was literally grinning from ear to ear. She ran up to me, leapt into my arms, and expressed to me that she thought it was the greatest thing that she had ever seen. If I wasn't already questioning our relationship, I began on that day. Now, I would say the second worst show I've ever been to in my entire life was another show actually here in Nashville, at another one of my favorite venues here in Nashville, that being the Exit Inn. My wife and I, many, many years ago, about 10 years ago, we went to go see a band called Rasputina. If you're unfamiliar with who Rasputina is, I envy you, my friend. If you have never seen the band live, I wish that you and I could change places, because that was something that was so egregious that I feel as if I have post-traumatic stress. I remember, as the show was going on, and this is a band that my wife claimed at the time to like, although I had never really heard her listen to them much before or ever since, I think even she would acknowledge that the show was just beyond pitiful. But it was one of those shows where I was so bored that I literally began walking laps in the venue, just looking around. I remember I went outside a few times. I came back in, and at this place in Nashville called the Exit Inn, they have this sort of wall of fame where all of these bands and artists have played over the years, or of all of these bands and artists who've played there over the years. And I remember I was so bored. I was so annoyed by this band. Again, I did not know that music could be this bad. Music is my life. Music is like the most important thing in my life. I did not know that music could be this unenjoyable until I went to go see them live. And I remember I stood there looking at the wall, most of their show, just trying to get anything else into my mind besides the horrendousness that was going on stage. And at a certain point in time, I went up to the bar to order myself a beverage, and I remember I must have not been hiding my disdain very well. I have a tendency to have a lousy poker face when I'm not having a good time. Not quite as bad a poker face as my wife has, but mine is, mine could use a little bit of work also. And I remember walking up to the bar to order myself a beverage, and the bartender asked me, he said, "You having a good time, man? You enjoying the show?" I remember just looking at him and saying, "No! This is like the worst thing I've ever seen." And he agreed with me, and he bought me a shot, and he and I did a shot together, celebrating the heinousness of Rasputina. Now, Dresden Dolls, they weren't necessarily that bad. At least they were forgettable. They might be in my top 5 or 10 worst shows I've ever seen. It's just Amanda Palmer, man. I just don't really like her. But apart from that, I've always had a really good experience going to the Brooklyn Bowl. It is a size venue that I like. As I mentioned before, it is a place that some locals here sort of take a dump on. I've always had a good time there. That's one thing about Nashville that is awesome, is the music venues here are just top-notch. My wife and I recently went to go see Kraftwerk play at a new place here in Nashville called The Pinnacle, and man, it is the jugs. There's really only one music venue here in Nashville that I don't really love. That is the Marathon Music Works. Now, it's not terrible. It's definitely not one of the worst places I've ever been, but as far as Nashville goes, that's my least favorite venue here in town, at least the ones I've been to. Whenever a show's announced that it's going to be at the Marathon Music Works, it's one of those places I just sort of rethink going. But Brooklyn Bowl is a place I love. It is in a part of town that is a lot of fun. My wife and I got downtown Sunday after work and decided to grab some grub and some suds, and we headed into the show, and I was very delighted when we got into the show to find that the band His Lordship had a merch table. That was one thing I was very much looking forward to, was seeing what kind of merch they had. In particular, because I was such a huge fan of this record on Spotify, I wanted to get my hands on a physical copy of it. Now, one thing I will say about seeing Johnny Marr live, and one thing I will say about going down to this show a couple weeks ago at the Brooklyn Bowl, was that I was pretty much aware of the fact that I was not going to be buying any Johnny Marr merch, because I had seen him in September in San Francisco, the September before, and I don't know who it is that designs Johnny Marr's merch, but that person should be terminated. Johnny Marr's merch is something that I don't understand what he is doing with his merch. It's just not good. It's ugly. I don't know. It's just something that I don't like. There's nothing about it that I like. So I knew that I was not going to be buying any Johnny Marr merch, but I was hoping to at least get my hands on this record. Perhaps a His Lordship t-shirt, which unfortunately they were running low on shirts, but I was able to get my hands on this record, which was basically, at the end of the day, my merch goal. I love the artwork on this record. I love that photograph. I love the font. I love this very simple sort of artwork on the back. If you open this record up, it is very well done. Whoever designed this record did a very good job. I love this artwork in the front of the inner sleeve of the members of the band, and I also like the credit page, which is just very clean, very simple, but yet very nicely done, very eloquent, and also elegant, not eloquent. I'm not very eloquent, but one of my favorite things about this record is it is on this very cool, translucent, clear vinyl. Beautiful, beautiful record. I've been listening to this album in very heavy rotation over the past month or so. I think that this record is beautiful. Now, as far as the band's performance, as I mentioned before, they came out, and the first song they played was my favorite song on this record, at least, which is "I Fly Planes into Hurricanes." Probably my favorite album in the entire band's, or favorite song in the band's entire canon, at least of the stuff that I've heard. I absolutely love that song, man. To me, that is easily one of my favorite songs of 2025. This record is going to be one of my favorite records of 2025, but the song I Fly Planes into Hurricanes is just awesome. This band live is incredible. They come out, they just kick you in the balls. I mean, every song, like I said before, every song is about 2 minutes. It's just spastic, high energy. I could not get enough of their set. Most of the time when I go see bands that I want to see, especially if it is somebody like Johnny Marr, Morrissey, or, one of my ultra elite favorite artists of all time, the opening band sometimes just kind of gets in the way. Now, as a younger person, I was somebody that I loved going to see opening bands. It was a way that I got turned on to new music. But as I've become an old piece of gristle, seeing live opening bands isn't always something that I'm in the mood for. But this band I was excited about, and this band definitely lived up to my expectations, sort of surpassed my expectations. This is a band that if they ever come back to Nashville opening for anybody else or on their own, I will be there. You won't even have to think twice about it. If you want to avoid seeing me out in public and this band is playing in Nashville, just don't go to the show, because I will be there, I guarantee you. Even if they are opening for an artist that I don't like, I will go there just to see them. I can't recommend this album or their live performance enough. Check it out. I think you will dig it. If you don't like it, you and I have nothing in common. As far as the Johnny Marr show goes, I thought it was awesome. In between his Lordship set, while they were setting up for Johnny Marr, my wife and I got into this conversation with a couple of lovely older guys, people that are even a little bit older than myself, but they had come into town, into Nashville, from Asheville, North Carolina, just to see the Johnny Marr show, and they asked me if I had seen Johnny Marr live before, which I had. I'd seen him last September out in San Francisco. I explained to them what I thought of the show, what they could expect from the show. Now, they asked me if I had seen Morrissey live, which I have many, many times over the years. Morrissey is my guy. I am a total Steve wonk. I admit that. I admitted that to them. Now, we got on the topic of the Smiths. Now, where this conversation went was something that I totally did not see coming. Now, I love talking about music. I love talking about music with people, whether I'm at work, whether it's on this channel, or whether I am just out at a show. I love talking music. I love hearing people's opinions. But this guy said something that I never really thought of before. Now, it sort of makes sense in a way. Now, it doesn't make sense to me because you're talking about my favorite band of all time. He told me that he came out to see Johnny Marr specifically because he is one of his favorite guitar players of all time. Both of these guys sort of identified themselves as being total guitar nerds, and that was what they get off on. And so we got on the topic of talking about the Smiths, and he asked me, he said, well, does he play any Smiths songs? And I said, typically, yes. Johnny Marr will play 4 or 5, sometimes 6 Smiths songs in his set. And, I think it's kind of cool when he does it, although, vocally, it isn't really the same thing. Now, I've said this, I think I mentioned this on the show after I saw the show last September in San Francisco. I did a review of that show, and I've always said this about Johnny Marr in terms of his music. I like Johnny Marr's solo catalog enough. It isn't necessarily my luggage. It isn't life-altering. I typically listen to it for the guitar playing because, in my opinion, he's not only my favorite guitar player of all time, but yes, the greatest guitar player of all time. And yes, the Smiths being my favorite band, I love hearing him play the Smiths material on guitar because he plays it note perfect. I will say that about going to see Morrissey live. Now, Morrissey, if Johnny Marr and Morrissey were playing on the same night in the same town, it's easy. No offense, John, I love you. I do. You're my favorite guitar player of all time. But I'm going to see Steve every day of the week, man. I mean, that's not even close, because to me, Johnny Marr's solo material is fine. It's okay. Like I said, I typically play it, or I typically listen to it for the guitar playing. His songwriting is fine. His voice is, it's good for what it is. Johnny Marr's voice, to me, is sort of bland. It's sort of generic. It's kind of an every voice. It's not a bad voice. It just doesn't really have a lot of personality. And to me, I think that's where the real, tease is when you go see Johnny Marr live, is he plays the Smiths material just note perfect. At both the show we just saw here last couple weeks ago and the show we saw in San Francisco last year, one of the highlights to me is he plays This Charming Man, which to me, I've said it on this channel before, is a perfect song. It's not necessarily my favorite song of all time. It's not my favorite song in the Smiths canon, but it is a perfect song. 2.5 minute pop perfection. And that guitar intro, to me, it just gives me the feels, man. I mean, I said this before. Johnny Marr is my favorite guitar player of all time. There's just something about his playing that gives me the feels, much more so than any other guitar player I've ever heard in my entire life. And he goes into that song, and every hair on my body is standing up. And then he drops into the vocal track, and it's just like, oh, man. Because when you hear that guitar intro, and you hear it played note perfect, exactly like it was on the record. When the vocal track comes in, I don't want to hear Johnny Marr's voice. I want to hear Morrissey's voice. It's the same thing when I go see Morrissey live, which I've seen many more times than Johnny Marr. I've never one time ever heard a Morrissey guitar player be able to nail the Smiths guitar sound the way that Johnny Marr does, even in Morrissey's best bands, which his current band is not. In fact, I would say his current band is his weakest band, and they do the weakest job at playing the Smiths material. Now, they're not terrible, and I'm always going to love going to see Steve, but when you go see Morrissey live and they play the Smiths stuff, it just doesn't hit the right note, especially his current band, which to me, his current band are just two-dimensional. I mean, they have like no energy. Even this sort of simpler Morrissey material just sits there musically. It doesn't do anything. Now, Morrissey is great live still. His voice still sounds great. He still looks good. Now, that's sort of where I was going. That isn't really the point here. The point is, talking about Morrissey's vocals, we got onto the topic with these two guys. We were talking about the Smiths and the fact that both of these guys love Johnny Marr as a guitar player, but one of the two guys in particular said, apart from Johnny Marr's guitar playing, I've never really liked the Smiths because I just can't handle Morrissey's vocals. To me, he reminds me of Geddy Lee. He said, I like Rush musically, but I can't listen to Rush because I don't like the vocals of Geddy Lee. Now, I will say this to you. I'm a casual Rush fan enough. They aren't necessarily my luggage, but if I'm in the mood for them, I can boogie to some Rush once in a while. To me, some of their stuff is a little bit cheesy. There's a little bit too much mayonnaise on that sandwich from time to time. But if I'm in the mood for it, I can handle Rush. Now, I get that Morrissey's vocals are not necessarily for everybody. I don't even begrudge that. I understand that it's an acquired taste for some people. But to compare it to Geddy Lee, I have never heard that. I've never heard that. Now, again, I don't know if he was technically comparing it to Geddy Lee or if it was just that sort of the irritants that he was comparing to Geddy Lee. But I thought that the Johnny Marr show was awesome. He came out, and at the very beginning of the show, he seemed a little bit uptight. He seemed a little bit tense. He mentioned it a couple times during the show that this was his first, this was the first show of this tour, and he had some issues getting his guitars to the United States through the courier service that he used. Now, somebody asked him during the show if he had gotten his guitars, and I don't know that he necessarily answered the question. He did say that he had embarrassed the courier service because he had posted a few things on his social media about, hey, where are my guitars? I got work to do here, son. He mentioned that I think it was UPS. He said that UPS had asked him, what do your guitars look like? Which did not necessarily fill him with a tremendous amount of faith that he was ever going to get his guitars back. But Johnny Marr came out. I thought that he played very well. Now, this is something that I have to point out. This is somebody that I have to call out. Now, I don't necessarily like to do this. I like to keep this channel as positive and light and fun as possible. I do believe that there's enough cancer out there in social media. This channel is dedicated to the positivity of music, the fact that music can save your life, the fact that music has saved my life countless times over the years. There's plenty of room out there for negativity. You can find it other places on social media, on YouTube, if that's what you're interested in. That isn't necessarily what I'm trying to peddle here, but there is one person at this show in particular that I have to call out, somebody that I just, oh my God, just absolutely ruffled my begonia's son. That is, now, when the opening band was playing, his Lordship, I would say that the venue was about maybe a third full. After they played, people began to sort of filter in more and more and more. Now, at the end of the day, I would say that the show was not completely sold out. If I had to venture an estimate, I would say that the show was probably 2/3 to 3/4 sold out. I mean, the most sold out show I've ever seen at the Brooklyn Bowl, sadly, was once again the Dresden Dolls, which I will never understand. Nashville is sort of a weird town when it comes to music. You never really know how these shows are going to draw. Now, if you're out there wanting to see Post Malone or Jelly Roll or Machine Gun Kelly or Taylor Swift or Billie Eilish, Morgan Wallen, I mean, Nashville is just going to pack those places. Most of those artists, I think, play the NFL Stadium here. But for artists like, Johnny Marr and some of the other bands that I've seen here in Nashville, sometimes it's a little bit unpredictable. I feel like getting 2/3 to 3/4 of a full room in Nashville for a person like Johnny Marr is very respectable. Now, when he came out on stage, or what I was going to say is during the opening band, his Lordship, I had a great view. Everybody was just sort of taking in the show and enjoying it, and there weren't a ton of people on their phones. Obviously, this is not a band, his Lordship, that as of yet are a household name, although if it were up to me, and if I have any power over it, whatever little influence this dumb little YouTube channel has, this is a band and an artist that I'm going to be pimping. If it were up to me, this is a band that would be much more well-known than they are. I think they should be more well-known than they are. But Johnny Marr comes out on stage, and suddenly what happens? What happens basically at every show you go to nowadays? Now, keep in mind, I realize I'm just an old piece of gristle. I know. I'm archaic. I'm an old man. But I don't love the phones at the shows. Now, I've said this on this channel before. I've said this to other people. There are times, occasionally, when I will go on YouTube and I'll look at live footage that was obviously filmed on somebody's dumb phone. So I guess I'm capable of being hypocritical, but I just don't love it, especially when I'm there in person. I'm there to see it. I'm there to ingest it with my eyes and my ears and my nose, all my senses. And as soon as Johnny Marr walks out on stage, everybody in the world has their phone up. Now, this one person in particular, and again, I don't want to get all negative here, but this woman standing right in front of me, a woman wearing a U2 t-shirt who was built much like a love seat. I'm not exactly sure how people reach these sort of cartoonish proportions, but her phone was up in my face the entire time. I remember thinking to myself, nobody out there is watching your dumb Facebook Live. Nobody wants to watch your dumb video. Put your phone down, or at least get it out of my face. At least have enough courtesy to take a look around you, or perhaps hold the phone down a little bit lower so the people standing behind you are not forced to look at your dumb phone for the duration of the show. The night before the Johnny Marr show, my wife and I went to the TPAC, which is the Tennessee Performing Arts Center, where we witnessed a screening of one of the greatest films of all time. I mean, let's just be honest with each other. Let's not say anything that isn't true. We went to go see The Princess Bride, a movie that I love, a movie that I saw in the theater as a wee lad, a film that my wife also absolutely loves. Now, her and I don't necessarily agree on everything. We don't necessarily agree all the time on film or cinema or music or cinema or books, but we both absolutely love The Princess Bride. Now, at the TPAC, after the film screened, the main actor of the film, Cary Elwes, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. I'm probably butchering it. I'm terrible at names. But he came out, and he did a very cool sort of, one-person Q&A, one-man panel, told stories about the film and the making of the film, and it was awesome. It was actually something that was a lot of fun. I had done the same thing many years ago with Mike Judge in Seattle when they released the movie Idiocracy. I'm a huge Mike Judge fan, and it was sort of that same experience. He told stories about the film, the making of the film, and everything that went around it. And they told us right at the very beginning, okay, no phones. You get one warning, and after that, you're hitting the bricks because we're not messing around. No phones. Just enjoy the show, enjoy the movie. And honestly, even though I'm not somebody that necessarily loves being told what to do, I thought it was awesome. I love the fact that nobody had their phones out. Nobody was filming for TikTok or Facebook Live or whatever dumb things that people like to post when they go to shows. Now, I will say the one thing that sort of annoyed me about that show, my wife and I have a tendency to be sort of like magnets for annoying people, or it's just perhaps people are just becoming more and more annoying. I mean, this woman at Johnny Marr with the U2 show, with the U2 shirt, I mean, she could not have been any more annoying had she tried. Now, I don't know why this is, but sometimes when it's younger people, Gen Zers and stuff like that, I have a tendency to be a little bit more forgiving. I think to myself, all right, They grew up on their phones. Maybe they don't know any better. Young people don't tend to have the courtesy or the manners that people develop when they get older. I realize that's painting with a broad brush. I'm not saying that to be judgmental. It just sometimes with younger people, I have a tendency to look the other way. But this woman was a older woman. She should have known better. She should have at least had a little bit of courtesy. Put your phone down. Now, at the T-Pack, when we went to go see the Princess Bride thing, the two girls sitting to my left, they thought they were really funny. They were talking the whole time. They were doing their sort of take on Mystery Science Theater 3000, and it was not funny. I can tell you. I didn't say anything to them because I'm a very non-confrontational person. I'm very easygoing. It was the same thing with this woman with the U2 shirt on, this woman that was just massive. I mean, I don't understand the proportions of people that we live around these days. I was telling my wife this the other day. Somebody that I'm a huge fan of, somebody that I am going to be talking about on this channel relatively soon, is Cass Elliot. Cass Elliot, to me, is one of the greatest singers of all time. I am a huge fan of hers. I love Laurel Canyon. I love the California sound. Mamas and the Papas are one of my favorite bands of all time. Now, you go back to when Cass Elliot roamed this planet. Her size was somewhat of an anomaly. People always took note of her proportions, but if you look at Cass Elliot and you compare her to today's standards, Cass Elliot is not necessarily that big. This woman standing in front of me with the U2 shirt was probably 2 Cass Elliots, and she would not get her phone out of my face. It definitely did take away a little bit from my enjoyment of the show, but the show itself was awesome. I thought that Johnny Marr looked great. He sounded great. Once he kind of got into the show, I thought the show was awesome. Like I said, he seemed a little bit uptight, a little bit tense at the very beginning, but he got into it, and I thought the crowd gave him a good response, the people that weren't staring at their phones the whole time, and I thought that the show was awesome. I realized that the Johnny Marr tour just ended, so I won't tell you. If you're planning on going out and seeing this tour, you should, but next time he does come to your area, I would definitely recommend it. If you were looking for somebody to do a real sort of true spot-on version of the old Smiths classics, I don't think that you'd be barking up the right tree, but his solo music to me isn't anything to sneeze at. Like I said before, it isn't necessarily my luggage. If I had to make one big quibble about Johnny Marr in terms of his solo music, to me, and again, I don't say this as if I'm not a fan because I'm a casual fan, but to me, it's just a little bit too Oasis-y, and again, I'm not saying that because I hate Oasis. I'm a casual fan. I think that they are fine. I don't necessarily think that they should be the biggest band in the world, but to me, it's Johnny Marr's solo stuff is just a little bit too Oasis-y, and his voice to me is just a little bit sort of generic. It's not a bad voice. It's much better than I can do, but I've heard better. I've seen better. Anyway, man, this is Archaic Records. Thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store like Variety Records in Columbia, Tennessee. Check back for Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And I know I've been gone for a while. I am back. I do apologize. I am not apologizing for my time away. Keep in mind, I am apologizing for my return. Hopefully, the summer has been pretty crazy, but hopefully now that things are beginning to normalize a little bit, I will have a little bit more time to dedicate to this channel, much to your chagrin. Do yourself a favor and check out his Lordship, Bored Animal. I do believe that you will love this record. I do believe that you will thank me, and I do believe that I will say you're welcome. Anyway, unless you've got anything else to add, I think we've just about covered it. So until next time, my friends, talk to you then.